half article is better than thousands of Buhari.
Buhari is doing the best in Nigeria.
You're watching Root TV Nigeria, and this is Dance of Democracy. I am Itogi Mo Edet. Supplementary elections were held across 6 states in Nigeria, and one stood out, Kano, which was marred by violence. But we saw the incumbent, Ganduje, winning for a second term. Now, the big question is, will the opposition, main opposition, PDP, contest that result, which he won by 8,000 votes? My guest today is Jido, geopolitical analyst, election observer, and a consultant at OJA Consult. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, how would you describe both elections in Kano? First, the one we had on the general governorship election and the supplementary, which was held over the weekend.
Well, the Kano elections, unfortunately, has become a sore point in the 2019 elections. In the first elections on February 23rd, we saw Kano overwhelmingly voting for President Buhari with over 1.4 million votes. With the first runner-up, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, scoring a paltry 391,000 or thereabout votes. However, 2 weeks after, it was a different ballgame. Governor Umar Ganduje fought the battle of his life when, at the end of the polls, he was actually trailing by about 20,000, trailing the PDP governorship candidate by about 20,000. However, INEC claimed that there were about 138,000 to 141,000 council votes. Because we were getting different. Initially, they said 141,000, then later 138,000. But across some polling units in 22 local government out of 44, there were a number of, very huge number of council votes, which could have tilted victory one way or the other. So for that reason, a supplementary election was called for, which held over the weekend on March 23. However, what was reported by the media who were accredited to observe the election, as well as some civil society organizations, was that there were invasions of the polling units by hoodlums who chased away genuine voters. There were issues of inducement of voters. There was actually outright violence in which party agents of PDP were allegedly chased out. We saw footages, pictures of some bloodied PDP agents who were chased out of some polling unit. And of course, why would you chase away a polling agent if you don't have a sinister motive? And the question everybody is asking is, where were the security agencies when all of this was happening? Because in Kano, you have a DIG in charge of the security apparatus of that supplementary election. That is next in command to an AIG. You have 2 AIGs. You have several commissioners of police. What impact did their presence in Kano make? That you have scenario where party agents of opposition party were chased away, voters were prevented from accessing some of the polling units. Allegedly, some result was some previously purchased PVCs were allegedly handed over to some of the invaders, or who, according to the PDP chairman, acting PDP chairman in Kano, said were imported from the neighboring state to Kano, and that they were handed over PVCs that have been previously purchased to go and vote. Some of them allegedly also impersonated INEC officials. They were, I don't know how they were able to get the jacket. Long story short, we had media reports that some accredited media too were held hostage for filming some of the malpractices that was going on.
But how does this make up with the result? Because eventually, all of this will, one way or the other, impact on the result, which has been announced.
And which is why a lot of people were dissatisfied, particularly with Kano. Recall that it wasn't Kano that we have, it wasn't Kano alone that we have supplementary elections. Yes. There was in Sokoto, there was in Plateau, there was in Benue, and there was in Kano. How come everybody is speaking negatively about Kano? With the exception of APC chieftains and quals. So it was, and ahead of that election, it was the APC chairman in Kano was quoted as saying that this supplementary election was going to be a do or die for them.
And that played out.
That played out. We also knew that the governor, Ganduje, paid visit to Aso Rock. Even though the presidency said, look, I'm not going to be involved.
Part of it.
There was a press statement to that effect. So how come can we say that the police and security agents were complicit to have allowed thugs to invade polling units and, you know, intimidate voters? So, of course, that is adopting a Machiavellian principle of the end justifies the means. Now, they have been declared winner by about 9,000 votes, I mean APC. But everybody, I mean, most discerning analysts will tell you that that does not reflect in true sense
but
the will of majority.
What would it play out? How will this play out in court? I mean, because
it's going to definitely play out in court.
Looking at, you know, the first election and the second.
The first election meaning the first governorship election.
Yes, first governorship election.
Of course, PDP are threatening to go to court. And one would think that they will marshal all their witnesses and their evidence and exhibits and go to tribunal. They have 21 days within which to file their suit, their case, their matter, and the tribunal will look at it, the merit and otherwise of it. Within 180 days, it's expected that a judgment will be entered. And don't forget, something similar or akin to what happened in Kano was played out on September 27, 2018 in Osun State, which is my home state. Very unfortunate. And you could see that on the eve of this supplementary election, the court, the trial court, the tribunal actually gave victory to the PDP candidate. It's so disheartening that a lot of politicians or political actors resort to self-help in order to gain political advantage. Recall that the reason why there was inconclusive election in the first place was because of widespread violence that led to cancellation of
We didn't seem to learn lessons from that.
There was no lessons, and there will be no lessons because the greatest incentive to crime is the impunity. When you know that committing this crime, you are likely going to get away with it, you say, okay, I mean.
But who would you say is responsible for the violence in Kano?
Of course, the political actors. The politicians. The two, even though the APC may have the upper hand, I don't believe that PDP also were just folding their arms and receiving all the bashing and all of that. They possibly also help themselves in some of the places where which can be tagged as their own stronghold. But what is condemnable is that there was violence at all. But you think, I condemn that because knowing full well that that's the trademark of a politician, you will have expected that the huge number of deployment, security deployment, will nip this in the bud, will prevent it from happening. But how come you have a DIG supervising an election? Supplementary election, not even a statewide election. And you still have talks, having a field day. You still have bloody nose, you still have instances of party agents who should be protected by law. Because polling agents, or because the law called them polling agents, not party agents, but they are, it's one and same. They are protected by law and they are supposed to serve the interest of their parties in ensuring credibility of the process. They are supposed to be allowed to distribution centers where you are distributing polling materials. They are supposed to be allowed to polling units. They are supposed to be allowed to collation centers. They are supposed to be allowed to witness all the value chains in the elections. So where you have to chase away and beat some of them to the pulp, tear their clothes, give them a bloody face, then it shows that you intended to undermine the process. That's why you don't want them to witness it. The crew of AIT were held hostage and made to delete some of the things they have filmed before they were eventually released. Why? If what they filmed was not
made public,
was something for public consumption, they wouldn't have been held hostage.
But do you think INEC was in a haste to have announced the result? Because looking at the fact that there were widespread violence, just for, like you mentioned, just for supplementary elections, don't you think they would have held back the result and probably look at allow things to settle before announcing the result?
Delay is dangerous. Delay is dangerous. If they have held back, and this morning one of the parties will have gone to court to arrest the process. That's what happened in Bauchi and Adamawa now. So see, we are now abusing the court processes. INEC announced the resumption of collation in Tafawa Balewa local government. The next day you have APC going to court to say no. Up till now, a week after the resumption was supposed to, we haven't gotten a final note from the court. Maybe today, tomorrow, we will know whether there will be resumption of collation. So people are now resorting to courts to frustrate the electoral process. And if INEC are tarried, it's better the way INEC has done. Wash his hand like Pontius Pilate. Wash his hand off the election. Let whoever is aggrieved approach the tribunal. The tribunal is meant to do substantial justice. Looking at all the facts on the table, they will be able to come to a conclusion whether the APC candidate was declared legitimately or in error. And they can correct those errors. But INEC cannot help the process because already it was taking too long. I was in a studio and we were waiting from about afternoon for 2 local governments. And when it eventually came, there was a long interventions by the agents on ground. Everybody want to speak, either in favor or against what has happened. And I am sure that if courts were to be open on Sunday, somebody will have approached the court to get.
But let me ask this final question: is there any way INEC can actually avoid a rerun at all? Is there any way? One,
if the law is amended, and they said, look,
for the board electoral law,
I mean the Electoral Act. Okay. Because Electoral Act Section 53 says where there's overvoting, council, once the council and the margin of lead between the person who is leading and the first runner up is so that can take victory one way or the other, you don't make a declaration. So you need to have amend Section 26, Section 53 of the Electoral Act, and then the INEC regulations and guidelines that says when there is a margin of lead and the margin by which the person who is leading and the first runner is such that the number of council votes can take victory one way or the other, you don't make a declaration of a winner. You need to amend that. That's one. Two, you can avoid this if the political elite decides to play by the rules. It is they are not wanting to play by the rules that led to cancellation in the first place. Look at the unfortunate incident happening in Benue, where after the collation officer have announced the results for Gboko local government, on their way to Makurdi, she was shot. Now she's in the hospital. Surgery has to be conducted, and we hope that she will survive it. The woman in Bauchi, the one that the collation officer for Tafawa Balewa local government, when INEC announced the resumption of collation, the woman said, I'm not involved again. I don't want to be participate. I don't want to participate. Why? Because she said she's been receiving a lot of threats to her life and that of her family by some political interest groups. So when we remove violence from our electoral process and everybody wants to play by the rule, you will avoid this issue of council vote. And once there is no council vote, the only other reason why there will be inconclusive election is if there is no violence, everything was peaceful. The only reason why INEC will declare election inconclusive is if none of the candidates is able to meet the prescription of Section 176 of the Constitution, which says that, 1, you must have majority of valid vote cast. 2, you must have 25% of vote cast in at least 2/3 of the local government in those states. So, assuming that none of the candidates eventually, I'm saying devoid of violence, devoid of shenanigans, of non-use of SCADID and all of that leads to cancellations and overvoting. If you don't have that, the only other condition by which you have, it will not even be called supplementary election, it will be runoff. Because once none of the candidates is able to meet the threshold prescribed by Section 176, INEC will not make a winner, it will not declare a winner. There will not be a runoff between the two top candidates. But the supplementary election is a child of necessity, and as such, unless the politicians are ready to behave themselves, unless the security agencies are ready to be professional, unless and until when we are able to break the culture of impunity, which incites people to want to resort to self-help, there will be need to conduct supplementary election.
Indeed. Thank you very much. My guest has been Jido Ojo, a political analyst, election observer, and a consultant at OJA Consult. And we have been looking at the fallout in the supplementary elections and Kano in focus. It's been Dance of Democracy. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Till next time, I am Itogi Mo, edit.
Half article is better than thousands of Buhari.
Buhari is doing the best in Nigeria.